I went to eBay to find a video card for review and purely by chance came across a good offer, the GTX 1070, which was going for $75 at the time, and I grabbed myself 2 pieces so that we can find out today what the GeForce GTX 1070 can do in 2023. First, a little history. The end of spring 2016, over 7 years ago, NVIDIA introduced the Pascal flagship, the GTX 1080. NVIDIA later introduced their budget solutions and rolled out the GTX 1070 to the market. At the time, the reviews about the GTX 1070 were mostly positive and everyone was delighted with the performance and energy efficiency that came with it. Come 2017, I get myself a GTX 1070 and the card could easily run all the modern titles at the time, giving out amazing performance in both 1080p and 1440p. In addition, the chip on the 1070 was the same as that on the GTX 1080, the GP104, although somewhat stripped down but with modest frequencies. It had the same amount of memory as the GTX 1080, both coming with 8GB of VRAM but a simple GDDR5 without the X prefix for the GTX 1070. This meant the GTX 1080's memory speed topped at 10,000 MHz with a bandwidth at 320 gigabits per second, with the younger representative of the 1070 at 8,000 MHz and 256 GB per second respectively. This allowed the GTX 1070 to run cooler and be a more energy efficient option with a power draw of 150 watts and a much cheaper alternative to the flagship from the Maxwell generation, the GTX 980 Ti, which had a power draw of 250 watts, in addition to having an extra 2 GB of VRAM. At the time, the prices were quite interesting. Even the GTX 1080 was more affordable than the Maxwell flagship, with prices ranging from $599 to $699 against $649 for the 980 Ti. That meant that there were chances to find the GTX 1080 going for cheaper than a 980 Ti, despite the Pascal option being better in everything. Sadly, things have changed now and it's impossible to get better value with current GPU pricing from NVIDIA. The GTX 1070 was priced at a reasonable $379 to $449 depending on the model, with almost identical performance. The GTX 1070 version I have in this case is an ASUS Dual with 2 fans. It's not the best because the memory has no cooling, and when I first got it, it gave out a high value of up to 80 degrees on the chip and a hotspot barely under 90, which was very bad. Therefore, I decided to disassemble the video card and completely clean it. There wasn't much dust, but the thermal paste had completely dried out and the thermal pads were worn out too, so I decided to replace them and completely clean it. I put in new thermal pads, smeared some fresh thermal paste on it, and it was as good as new. And then, to complete the picture, I made an undervolt of 900 mV and an overclocking on the memory by a plus 400 MHz. Our test stand isn't changed and you can see it on the screen with ideal conditions for the most accurate results. The tests, by the way, will be in 1080p. The first game was Assassin's Creed Valhalla on very high settings. Throughout the entire benchmark, the 1070 maintains an almost stable 50 FPS. The frame graph is quite stable. If you lower the settings a little, it can get over 60 FPS with minor drops below 60. The next game I tested was Atomic Heart on ultra settings. The game is very well optimized unlike other games, and playing it on 1080p ultra will still remain in the 50 to 60 FPS zone. For better performance, you can tweak some of the settings and the game will still remain gorgeous. The next game was Control on Ultra with 4x MSAA. These settings are quite demanding for many mid-range cards, so it's not surprising that most mid-range video cards of the past couple of years will struggle to get 60 FPS on Ultra. But we still managed to get a playable 40 to 50 FPS, and since it's a single player title, locking it at 30 FPS is acceptable as well. The next game was CSGO, using competitive settings. Despite using competitive settings, the GTX 1070 could barely get 30 FPS. I'm just joking, it's CSGO, so of course, it gets 300 to 400 FPS, and that's pretty much what you can expect on most esport titles. The next game I tested was Cyberpunk 2077 with settings on high with AMD FSR set to quality. Despite its reputation, even Cyberpunk was playable with the GTX 1070. At high settings, I got from 45 to 50 FPS, and the frame time graph was smooth enough. And what about 1440p? The 1070 can still run the game, but averages on 30 FPS. There are some spikes on the frame time graph, meaning some stutters and shifts below 30 FPS might occur in more demanding areas, but it's still an enjoyable budget gaming option that many can go by, and there's always the option to lower the settings to improve performance. I also tested Days Gone on Ultra settings. On Ultra, the GTX 1070 is able to squeeze out 60 FPS with minor drops below 60 in more demanding scenes, but the experience is good and should remain above 60 FPS most of the time. I also tested Dying Light 2 set to high. The GTX 1070 gives us 45 to 50 FPS and the gameplay is smooth and enjoyable, so let's move on. On Fortnite, playing on average settings. When descending to the map, I got a stable 50 to 55 FPS, which is already promising. Once on the ground, it's already a little higher and we get 60 to 70 FPS. However, performance on DirectX 12 will differ from DirectX 11 on this game in particular. Next, I tested God of War on high. The 1070 does well and gives us 50 to 55 FPS, which is quite a decent result, and the gameplay is smooth and enjoyable. Next, I tested Hogwarts Legacy on high settings. The game is not particularly well optimized like others on this list, and our 1070 gets 40 to 45 FPS, and this is with constant spikes and dips on the frame graph and stutters in gameplay, so I recommend lowering your settings for smooth gameplay. The next game is Mafia Remake on high settings. The 1070 performs well with a stable 60 to 70 FPS, even when driving fast, and it performs even better when on foot. Overall, a very playable and enjoyable experience. Next is PUBG on competitive settings. When landing, we get over 300 FPS. Once we reach the ground, we lose over 100 FPS but still remain above 200 FPS in general, and you can easily play on a high refresh rate monitor of 144 Hz or more. Next, I tested Red Dead Redemption 2 on Ultra without additional settings, with AMD FSR set to quality. In terms of performance, we get a cinematic 30 FPS to 40 FPS experience without reducing the settings. It's still very playable, but I would recommend lowering some of the settings for optimal performance on heavier scenes. Next, I tested Shadow of the Tomb Raider on Ultra. This is a well-optimized game with support for SLI and Crossfire, and as for performance, we don't see anything below 60 FPS, but often as much as 70 FPS and above. Overall, a good enjoyable experience. As for The Last of Us Part 1, the PC Master Race Edition on high settings, the game gives us a warning due to a lack of VRAM, as it claims to need more than 8GB, which was more than enough back when the 1070 came out. And we get 35 to 45 FPS, with VRAM usage almost maxed out and RAM usage going over 16GB and up to 20GB of utilization, which is outrageous. Conclusion? Well, for the price that I got it for, which was $75, the card is one of the best bargains for entry-level gamers out there. Should you buy it or not? For the performance it gives us, we can't complain, and it was sold for a very good price, so if you can find one for the same, go for it. However, always remember there is risk in buying a used graphics card. However, if you find a good deal from a reliable seller, you can buy it, as the card is still capable enough to give you a decent playable experience on 1080p with acceptable FPS at decent settings. After all, Pascal turned out to be successful and quite reliable. So thank you for watching Live Games IT. Feel free to give us a like, don't forget to comment, and subscribe with the bell icon enabled to get notified when we launch our next videos. It supports us and helps our channel grow. Thank you and see you again at Live Games IT.